pleasure to be on with you.
Great to have you on the Morning Glory. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw Rishi Sunak singing about the joys of the Rwanda deal, and he's now gone to... He's managed to find somebody who thinks it's a great idea, who wants to sort of share the plan. So apparently the Chancellor of Austria is just as optimistic about it all as Rishi is.
Well, if the aim of the Rwanda scheme is to disorientate the electorate and make government think that it's actually doing something when it's doing nothing, the Rwanda scheme has worked incredibly well, hasn't it? We've talked about it incessantly for the last couple of years.
Right.
Those on the left who wish to have open borders and let people come across the channel with impunity hold it out to be draconian and abhorrent, and of course that suits the political landscape terrifically, because Rishi can paint himself as this centre-right politician seeking to do the right thing, but being held back by all these, difficult forces, including the ECHR, which they can vilify. So from a political performative perspective, Rwanda has been fantastic for the Conservative government. And maybe that's what the Chancellor of Austria wishes to follow. But from a practical perspective, from actually delivering what it's meant to do, well, as we know, only one person's gone to Rwanda. He was sent there with a £3,000 cheque in his back pocket and a glass of champagne in his hand.
And does anybody know what's happened to him? Because did he not disappear as soon as he got there?
Well, he's got 3,000 quid to come straight back to Europe club class, presumably.
It is extraordinary, isn't it? But I mean, the word coming from the the Austrian Chancellor's office was that, we need to think outside the box because, Europe is now under a massive strain because of all the migration. Well, maybe they should have thought of that when Angela Merkel started the whole shebang, 15, 20 years ago.
Absolutely. And I mean, the one obvious thing the European countries ought to be doing is suspending, if not terminating, the Schengen zone.
Yeah.
They have completely open borders. I mean, one of the things that Rishi Sunak is pointing towards to claim that the actions he's taking against illegal migration is working is that the cost of boats, or the cost of the crossing has gone from £1,500 a year to about £1,500 per head to £6,000 per head.
Right.
But, if an illegal migrant's got £6,000 and you haven't got borders across Europe, they can travel anywhere they want. These people are loaded. They can come into Italy, they can go to Germany, Austria, Greece, France, Netherlands, and of course then on to the UK. What we desperately need in the West, Western civilization needs to refamiliarize itself with what a border is and why it's so critically important that countries across Europe have borders, enforce their borders, and that the same happens in the United Kingdom and indeed on the island of Ireland. We saw the other day how suddenly the Irish government woke up to how terrific it would be if the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland actually worked as a border.
Yeah.
They wanted to stop the migrants coming from Northern Ireland. And that's the point. If we have borders, if we man those borders with people who are suitably trained and armed in the appropriate way, illegal migration would stop in its tracks. But we've eschewed borders. We've turned our back on borders as if there's some kind of parochial, historic, quaint concept that modernity doesn't require. Well, it is uncivilized not to have borders, because if you don't have borders, you import this problem, and our own civil society is assaulted in multiple respects, economically, physically, criminally, and possibly even terroristically. So we've got to just get back to basics. We need our borders. The Schengen zone should be got rid of, and we need to put armed forces at our borders. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it funny that the people like Labour MPs who get up in Parliament and say we must have a refugee scheme for Palestine haven't actually looked at Palestine's neighbours, who are Egypt and Jordan, who don't actually believe in not having a border and have got a very strong border and don't want any Palestinians moving into their land whatsoever.
Absolutely. The border at Rafah was constructed by Egypt after 2008, when there was a massive influx of Palestinians. And guess what? Those Palestinians brought to Egypt problems. And the Egyptians don't want it anymore. So no matter what the humanitarian issues are, in Gaza at the moment.
Right.
Egypt will not open the Rafah border.
Right.
And that should be sending a very strong signal to our leaders who are, including Lord Cameron, who seems obsessed with helping those who are, in Gaza over and above, and if necessary, to the detriment of our own people. We've got to refamiliarize ourselves with what a border is. It's not a quaint historic concept. It's a fundamental necessity for civilization. And without it, frankly, Mike, without wishing to sound, hyperbolic, without borders, it's the end of Western civilization.
Yeah.
We will be overrun. That's it.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And, of course, nobody criticises Egypt for being, shall we say, careful about who they let into their country. But if we do that, we get absolutely, pummeled from pillar to post about how dreadfully racist we all are and how ghastly we are. And surely everybody deserves to have a safe place to live if they're fleeing a war zone. But they don't say it to the Egyptians.
No, and this comes back to another fundamental failing that has infected our government for the last 25 years, if not longer, is that they seem to be governing for what they believe to be the global good, not for what's good for the United Kingdom and British citizens. So they're not looking. Keir Starmer is very guilty of this, because the Labour Party want open borders because they take the view that all immigrants have exactly the same rights as British citizens do. Well, actually, they don't.
Right.
They're not British citizens. We elected our governments to protect and promote our interests, not the world's.
Right.
We don't want to be putting immigrants' interests over and above to our own detriment, which is what's happening. And our elected officials, our elected representatives need also to reacquaint themselves with what their obligations are.
Yes.
And they are to the United Kingdom.
Exactly right. And, of course, today we also hear from Mel Stride that the government wants to use sort of unemployed boot camps to fill the job gaps. The job gaps, they say, they don't want to any longer fill with foreign workers, and they'd rather they were filled with unemployed people from this country. Well, welcome to the party, guys. It's a bit little and a bit late, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's all performative stuff, isn't it, Mike? There's no real substance to it.
No, and also, the reason that these jobs are not being filled currently is because it's not worth anybody's while to work in the care sector or in many places in the construction business. If you're already unemployed, you're not going to get that much money going to work, so you're not going to fancy doing it.
No, and this is a point I've been making for many years now, that the gap between what you can get on benefits and what you earn net after taxes on anything at or below a median wage in the United Kingdom is pretty close. So there's not much incentive to actually... Sorry, forgive me. There's not much incentive if you're in a low-paid job to actually go and work. You might as well stay at home and get your benefits. We've got 6 million people surviving on universal credit. That figure was 3 million in 2019.
Yeah.
We've got a broken labour market. What the government should be urgently focusing on are changing regulations and changing the tax system and the benefit system to ensure that people go back to work. And guess what? If people go back to work, there'll be less strain on government finances because there'll be less paid out in benefits, and the government will get more in tax receipts because they'll be earning a salary on which they will pay some tax. It's a win-win. In fact, I did the numbers, it's about £25,000 per head benefit to the exchequer for every individual who comes off benefits and goes back into the labour market. It's a massive turnaround. And people say, well, we've got to employ foreign workers because Brits aren't prepared to do the jobs. Brits would squarely do the jobs if it made sense to do them. I mean, let's just take the NHS, for example. The average entrance wage for a doctor in the NHS is about £28,000 per annum.
Yeah.
The average entrance wage in Australia is twice that, over £60,000 per annum. And the Australians tax their doctors less. So if you've got a universally applicable skill like in a medical profession and you're qualified highly enough to practice in the UK, you're more likely to get on a plane and go to Australia and double your income and more than double your net income. Why wouldn't you do it? And we see that in the numbers. In 2023, 15 to 20,000 doctors left the NHS and emigrated. This is the brain drain in action. This is what happens when an economy is overtaxed, isn't growing fast enough, and isn't paying its people enough wages. And we're not paying enough wages because we've adopted a third world approach to our economy, importing cheap labour, undermining the ability for British workers to get a fair wage, and overtaxing people into the bargain. It is a complete disaster. There is no joined-up thinking with this government. And again, it comes back to the fact that they don't seem to care about British citizens. They're taking a kind of global view. Immigrants are all welcome, whether they're coming in legally or illegally. And we've seen that in the numbers, haven't we, Mike?
Yeah.
Again, 1.4 million people came to the UK last year. People coming for degrees. But, OK, I get that. Some people, it's good for our universities and so on. But why the devil are they allowed to bring their families with them?
Well, that's ridiculous.
It's absolutely absurd. In fact, even people coming on a work visa shouldn't be allowed to bring their families with them. Come to the UK, discharge whatever obligation it was that they were going to discharge under their work visa, and then go home to their families. And that's the way it works the world over. But we've capitulated. We've lost the will to protect and promote that which is British. And people say, oh, don't get caught in the culture wars, Ben. But I think, as I've just illustrated, as we've just illustrated, Mike, the culture wars, the immigration issues, the undermining of the British worker, the difficulty in growing our economy, these are all interrelated.
Of course they are.
They don't stand, not any one of these stands on their own. They all affect each other. And we've got to understand that to protect this country, to protect its culture, to promote its prosperity, to protect British people, we need borders. We need to champion British interests. We need to promote private enterprise in the country. We need to promote the interests of the working and middle class from an economic perspective. These are basic things that Rishi Sunak and his colleagues ought to understand, but they obviously don't.
No, and it's a bit too late for them to suddenly start trying. Ben, we're out of time, unfortunately. We could do this for a lot longer, but we will. Good to talk to you. Ben Habib, Co-Deputy Leader, of course, of Reform UK.